Hello, friends. An election in a democratic country without a vibrant media ecosystem would be a paradox, which any democracy can ill afford, and is certainly impossible for the world's largest democracy with a steady history of conducting free and fair elections for the last 72 years. A discourse rich with meaning, multiplicity of views, richness, and diversity of voices makes a democracy vibrant and takes it from being merely representative to truly participatory. These values become even more important because we are living in interesting times of outrage and selective outrage, fake news and deepfake, misinformation and disinformation, and electoral surprises and electoral shocks, with a perceived hardening of stance and of hearts, marked by the decline of ideologies not only in India but also globally. Today, we are looking at the role of social media in elections, particularly in 2014 and 2019 Lok Sabha elections. 2014 is a turning point where the entire platform of elections transformed from traditional campaigns to Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. 2014 is called India's first social media elections. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, with his multifaceted career as an Indian politician, writer, and former international diplomat, is one of the most eloquent persons to talk about this topic. He also serves as a chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Information and Technology. It was my privilege to have an interview session with him. Sir, since 2014 is the first social media election and PM Narendra Modi is the first social media prime minister, what are the changes you see when the platform of elections are transformed from the traditional campaigns to social media campaigns?
It's not a complete transformation. What's happened is that social media has become an additional factor in the elections. But for example, in the West, Mr. Obama, if he wants to hold a mass meeting, will just issue a social media post. I'm talking about 2008 and 2012, and people will come. Here you still need the door-to-door, you still need the rallies, you still need the jeeps with the megaphones going through the neighborhoods, you still want the vehicles playing songs for the campaign songs of the party. All of those traditional methods have not disappeared. There are still posters on the walls, there is still Chumra, there is still appeals given in people's newspapers or slipped into under their doors at home. Every one of the traditional techniques has not been eclipsed by social media. Social media has become one more tool. And that's an important distinction because in many Western countries, social media has increasingly taken over some of the traditional means of doing things. And the things that we are used to, you won't see in an American campaign because a lot of that's now done by social media. That doesn't happen here yet. Secondly, the question of how decisively influential this may be is yet to be determined. For example, in 2009, there was a study. There was a study that said that there were 60 constituencies in which the number of social media users exceeded the margin of victory in that election. So if you imagine that if, for example, in a particular constituency, somebody has won by 500,000 votes, and in that constituency there are 500,000 social media users, that's a correlation they drew. That figure is 2009 elections. I would be sure that by 14 it had increased dramatically, and there probably was almost no constituency where social media users did not exceed the margin of victory of any candidate. By 2019 elections, 100% sure, because the number of people on the internet has gone up dramatically. When I first came to India in 2008, the figure I saw was 15% of India had access to the internet, including people on internet cafes, desktop computers, laptops, everything. Today, that figure is 65%. So it's unlikely that they're going on the internet for anything else. It's mainly social media on their mobile phones. They're doing WhatsApp, they're doing Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And that's how you are seeing social media having an influence, because more and more people have their political ideas conveyed to them directly on their mobile phones by social media. So that's been a very major change, and it's been increasing exponentially. So if in 2009, it was like icing on the cake, and in 2014 you said, well, it's a very useful thing, we must do it. In 2019, it's impossible not to do it. You have to be on social media. That's the big change that we've been seeing in all of this. What are the dangers, you ask? Obvious danger is fake news. There is an awful lot of disinformation out there, most of it deliberately and maliciously spread, of two or three kinds. One is against candidates, against their parties, and against heritage. And many people have still not learned how to discern the difference between genuine news and fake news. So a lot of fake history is peddled about Jawaharlal Nehru or various things, and people believe it because we have had in the past the culture that if you see something printed in a newspaper, it must be true. Somebody has checked it. They don't realize that when you see something seemingly printed on your WhatsApp, that it is not necessarily true and nobody has necessarily checked it. But people have yet to learn that there is a distinction. And that's one of the challenges we have. We have to educate people in what is a reliable site, what is not, how to check any story you might be tempted to believe against reliable sources. Fortunately, a lot of fact-checking sites have come in, Alt News and many others, but Boom and others have come. But the problem with those is their reach is much less than the reach of the fake news. So as a result, people are seeing the lies and very few of them are seeing the correction of the lies. That's the other problem. Beyond that, thank you, there is the danger that you will have the echo chamber problem. An echo chamber problem is, let's say you're with a group of friends of a similar social background or religious background or community background, and you are all in the same group and you're sending each other messages. One person's prejudices can infect everybody else, and you all reinforce each other. You hear the same thing from everyone, and an echo chamber is created where everyone is echoing the same ideas. That's also very dangerous in social media, whereas in conventional politics, there is a wider range of choice available, and of course, even if you only attend the rally of somebody you're interested in, you can read in the newspaper what the other candidate is saying. In social media, you'll only see what the group is saying. So that's the second big danger. And finally, I would say the third danger with social media is that the yardsticks and parameters governing your political choices can get very easily altered. Social media often has a narrative function, an agenda setting function. So for example, if for you, for example, you are thinking you want to vote because you're very irritated about the fact that your fees have gone up, or your hostel fees have gone up, or the university subsidy in your university has gone down, whatever it may be. But everyone starts talking to you about terrorist bombing in Pulwama, national security, this is the government, we have to protect, all of that. On social media, the narrative has changed the way you think about why you should be voting. And that becomes also a danger. It's a lesser danger because you are still the person who presses that button in the booth, so you should know what you really want. But that is also an influence upon you. So these are the dangers I sort of see. And then from the point of view of politicians, the danger is very clear that when you get into politics, you are trying to advocate certain policies and beliefs. But on social media, very often a reactive mode. Somebody says something, you feel obliged to react to it, and you may end up misportraying yourself or not portraying a truly rounded picture of what matters to you because you're being led by the nose by what's going on in social media. So those are some of the interesting challenges that we face. But I am by and large in favor. The only thing, the big thing that I worry is the lies. The BJP, for example, I'm not singling out one party, but they have, from the 9 elections and certainly from the 14 elections, have created an entire network of paid cells. So they will pay a person to sit in a room with 6 or 7 computers, create about 250 fake accounts, and then send 250 messages to different people, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, whether it's to people's WhatsApp groups, create various groups. Imagine on WhatsApp, each group is 256 people. So if one person in the course of a day, and is paid for it, he sends the same message to 256 people in 255 groups, you can imagine how much their message is getting out through a systematic selling of propaganda on this social media tool, which would not have been possible through genuine campaigning in the past. That's again something one should be alert.
What are the factors do you think influence the electoral polarization through social media?
Well, all these factors lead to polarization, especially if any party has a vested interest in promoting polarization. So what happens is that everything that I mentioned to you, and particularly the fake news slash trolling phenomenon, that involves peddling a particular point of view or a particular prejudice. And when you push that over and over again, you do end up in a position where you will be influencing the nature of the consider. How did you phrase your question? Just remind me what you said.
What are the factors that lead to electoral polarization?
Polarization. So the thing about polarization is when people are doing this and they are framing issues in a certain way, that becomes a litmus test. And if you are everyone who is in favor of that particular litmus test, whether it's anti-terrorism, pro-CAA, Bharat Mata Ki Jai, whatever the issue may be, all those in favor of that, they see themselves on one side as having nothing in common with those in the opposite echo chamber, which are against the things that these people are for and for the things these people are against. And in that divide, there is very little mutual give and take. I, in fact, wrote a piece yesterday about the attacks on me on social media from my own side, quote unquote, because I've taken certain stands, which I believe are the right and decent, independent stands to take, but which somehow don't fit into the polarization narrative. So when somebody from this camp dies and I'm sitting in this camp and I issue a condolence message, people in this camp are saying you're a terrible man, you're a closet Sanghi, this, that, and that kind of stuff is happening. That's a reflection of the polarization. Everything is black or white, for us or against us. You know, either you are completely against them in every respect or you're completely for them. We don't accept the possibility that you're with us but you are finding good things to say about them. That kind of mentality is very different. It's a kind of almost totalitarian mentality, but it comes with polarization.
Do you think the social media campaigns revolve around a charismatic leader rather than a political party's ideology, transformation of agendas?
That's a good point. There is a lot of personalization of politics on social media. At least that is the case because they have somebody to personalize. I don't know whether they can do the same with another leader the way they've done it with Mr. Modi. But certainly, the building up of Mr. Modi's image on social media has been a very significant factor.
Do you think social media was able to propagate post-truth in the political discourse?
Post-truth is a polite way of saying lies. What is post-truth? It's either true or it's false. You're dressing up false in a pretty skirt and calling it post-truth. That's nonsense. There is only truth and there is falsehood. When you say Jawaharlal Nehru died of syphilis, or you say Jawaharlal Nehru, you show a picture of him being greeted by his sister and his niece and says he was a womanizer. This kind of thing is either true or false. In this case, it's false. So, I mean, the fact is that you can't say this is post-truth because they have wanted to portray Nehru in a certain way. But that's not post-truth. That is basically propaganda, and it's often hurtful, false propaganda. Let's call it by what it is.
Do you think social media is able to create a political education among the youth?
Not always. I think sometimes yes. One of the things, for example, when you circulate articles and insights on social media, you circulate from respectable sources. I mean, my sons are both journalists and writers, and on their social media, they get articles from a wide variety of journals. They get academic journals, well-researched journals, peer-reviewed journals, as well as major newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, Le Monde, and so on. And then from those, they're able to read knowing this is a reputable source, and they got it on social media. So instead of having to go to the internet and search for all of these papers, people are sending them links and they get it that way. So you can be a source of positive education, but you must have the discernment to know what you're reading. Even I have been fooled sometimes by false stories, which turned out not to be true, from seemingly reputable sources. So you have to be careful and check and know how to read social media.
Do you think social media is able to create political recruitment? Political recruitment is taking place through social media.
It's happening already, and not just politically. Even some terrorist groups have recruited people through the internet.
Do you think social media have more impact on appealing to people's prejudices rather than conventional media sources?
Yes, I already said that. Particularly in the absence of fact-checking, it's very easy to do that.
Can social media claim a secular character?
No, I mean, social media itself is a neutral medium, but because it's accessible to all, it doesn't have any one particular ideological character. Social media is simply the medium. The message may be secular, it may be anti-secular. So you can't really say that social media is secular or not secular. A non secular person uses social media. In fact, some would say in India they use it more effectively than the secular people are using it.
If we are considering about the political parties that use social media more actively, BJP comes in first.
Yeah.
Is the political parties like Congress or leftist parties reason for failure in the elections is due to their inability to create more credentials on social media?
No, that's going too far. I am still not sure to what extent we can blame social media for victory and defeat yet. Um, unless there is a major controversy through social media affecting a particular candidate, there's always a range of factors influencing votes. But certainly, as I said, social media can set the agenda, shape the narrative, and reinforce prejudices. So all of those make it possible to help influence a victory or a defeat. But it's premature to, unless there's some deep statistical research, which I have not seen, very difficult to say that that alone has caused the result. Okay, you got your 10 questions.
Okay, sir.
Good luck, Fatima. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable insights. If you are new to my channel, please do like, share, and subscribe. Stay connected with us. Stay safe, study safe. Thank you.